Hello everybody, thanks for watching this recorded webinar which has been provided along with the sample external assessments, mark schemes and Chief Examiner's reports to support centres with the preparation for and the administration of the external assessment for Level 1 and Level 2 technical awards in graphic design. This level of support is the limit of what we can provide as an awarding organisation while still adhering to the Ofqual conditions of recognition. My name's Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE, and on the screen is a contact email that you can use to forward any queries that you may have about the information shared in this session. On the screen is the agenda for the session. I'm going to start by giving an overview of the external assessment before moving on to discuss each of the 4 tasks. Then at the end of the session I have a statement that includes advice from the Chief Examiner to share with you. So just to start, if we have a quick look at this overview of the qualification, you can see that it's only content from units 1, 2 and 3 that is subject to assessment in the external assessment. There does seem to be some confusion about the difference between internal and external assessment. Internally assessed means anything that is marked by you and quality assured by us. Externally assessed means that it's marked by NCFE. So you can see that as Unit 4 is the graphic design portfolio and is internally assessed only, content from that unit isn't subject to assessment in the exam. So you do need to make sure that all content from Units 1, 2 and 3 has been delivered prior to learners attempting the external assessment. It was noted in the Chief Examiner's report that the overwhelming majority of learners seemed to be well prepared and demonstrated valid understanding from all units. This external assessment is an invigilated assessment and it must be conducted in line with our regulations for the conduct of external assessment. This document gives important information about administering the assessment, including information about invigilation, so who can carry out the role of an invigilator, the number of invigilators required, and things like that. There's also information in the document about how the room should be set up and the role of the designated person. I can't emphasise enough how important the document is, so please make sure you give it a good read if you're involved in the administration of this assessment in any way. The qualification-specific instructions for delivery, or QSID, provides, as the name suggests, qualification-specific information. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see the extract from the document here that refers to these technical awards in graphic design. So you can see that it shows the duration of 10 hours and AWI, which is Assessment Window Invigilated, rather than AWS, which is Assessment Window Supervised, and for which the regulations are different. You can see that intranet and internet use is permitted and that a computer is required. So if we just refer back to the regs again for a minute, section 3 refers to the use of computers and electronic devices, and it states that centres should confirm if the use of computers or any electronic devices are allowed for the external assessment, and this information is available in the qualification specification and the QSID, and we know from the clip above that they are. So if applicable, the designated person needs to provide suitably trained technical assistants who are readily available in case of equipment malfunction only and have no other involvement with the assessment. So that means that their only role is to support in case of malfunction. They should not be supporting learners in any other way, and they should not have access to learner work. So again, it's really important that anyone involved with the administration of the external assessment reads the regulations to make sure that centres aren't at risk of malpractice or maladministration. And the document's available to download from QualHub. Okay, so this is the project brief from the summer 2019 paper, and this is the one I'm going to be referencing mainly throughout the session. But you'll see if you look at the other external assessment papers that have been published to the website that the layout of the paper and the tasks vary very little. So all of the information that's going to be shared in this session can be applied to all. The context of this brief is a festival called Joined Up, and the brief asks for a poster design. Information about the values of joined up and the target audience is all found within this text here, which is on page 4 of the external assessment paper. The assessment consists of 4 tasks, and as I mentioned previously, these tasks will change very little, if at all, window to window. What will change is the context they refer to. So you can see here on the screen task 1, which has 3 sections to it. So learners must show their initial graphic design ideas. They must explain how their ideas will meet the requirements of the target audience, and they must also explain how their ideas will meet the organisers' values of the Joined Up Festival, and they're what's detailed in the project brief. In the spring 2019 window, the external assessment paper followed the same format, but the context there was a logo design for DreamWax Records. But again, task 1 asked learners to generate ideas and comment on how they meet the needs of the client and the target audience. The sample external assessment brief differed very slightly. So for task 1, learners were asked to generate initial graphic design ideas and again comment on the client requirements as well as show how their designs meet the needs of the user. The difference with the sample external assessment, for which the context was a chain of sweet shops called the Bon Bon Parlour, is that learners were given a choice about what their outcome would be, so a design for floor graphics, a packaging design or a poster. Task 2 involves experimentation with the graphic components, and these are the 6 graphic components as stated throughout the qualification specification, which are colour, tone, line, composition, typography and imagery. Learners are required to annotate their experimentation and to include all experimentation, even rejected ideas. Task 3 is the production of the final design idea, and again this format and the requirements of task 3 are the same across the sample external paper and the paper from spring 2019. Learners must use imagery and typography, they must use the graphic design components, and they must use their ideas developed through experimentation in task 2. And then lastly, task 4 requires learners to produce an evaluation of the choices they made, how they used the graphic design components, the skills they used and the challenges they faced. They also need to evaluate how their design meets the brief from the clients and how it communicates the organiser's values, and this is exactly the same as for the sample brief for the Bon Bon Parlour and the spring window for DreamWax Records. Included in the external assessment paper is a checklist for learners to ensure that they've organised their work and have completed all of the requirements, and you can see that evidence can be physical or digital. I know you will all have mock external assessments built into your schemes of work, but this section is definitely one worth practicing to ensure learners allow enough time for organising their work within the 10 hours. It would be good practice to advise learners to complete and refer to the checklist as they go. In the Chief Examiner's report, it's mentioned that the vast majority of evidence submitted was collated and presented well with clear labelling of tasks which supported the examining process. Okay, so we've done a quick overview of the external assessment, so we'll move on and have a look at each of the tasks in a bit more detail. Firstly, I want to draw your attention to page 3 of the external assessment paper that states in relation to the use of resources, you can refer to books, magazines, the internet or other sources for research and inspiration. You must give references in your work for any of the following. If you use any information from the internet, if you use any information from books, magazines or any other formal research, or if you use images that are not your own. The use of the internet and other resources is for research and inspiration, and whilst it does state that the use of images must be referenced, it does not state that the use of images that are not the learner's own will be marked. The external assessment paper does state on the first page that all work must be original and the learner's own. Examiners agreed at standardisation that the use of internet or other secondary source images used within the learner's work could not be awarded marks as the work is not original and is not the learner's own work. The exception here is if the image sourced from the internet has been suitably manipulated and referenced. So just a recap of Task 1. Task 1 requires the learner to provide some initial graphic design ideas. As stated on the external assessment paper, learners' response must include their initial graphic design ideas, must include how their ideas will meet the requirements of the target audience and how they will meet the organisers' values of the Joined Up Festival. So for Task 1, I want to emphasise again that learner work must be original. The learners are given the option to access the internet within the external assessment in order to find ideas, research and inspiration. This does not have to be presented unless it actually informs the learner's own graphic design ideas. The Chief Examiner noted that for Task 1, some learners presented significant amounts of research, mood boards, analysis of the brief, client profiles and poster analysis. If it helps the learner to work out their initial ideas, it's okay, although it is time consuming and they must be aware that this is not required within the tasks, nor is it marked against within the mark scheme. Task 1 requires the learner to provide some initial graphic design ideas, and for this task examiners will award any initial ideas in any written or visual format as per the external assessment paper. Learners must explain how their ideas will meet the requirements of the target audience and how they will meet the organisers' values of the Joined Up Festival. So for this project brief, the values of the festival are listed as community, enjoyment, respect, acceptance and self-expression, and learners should make clear how these values are reflected within their ideas. Learners should be really encouraged to annotate their work to show how they think their ideas meet the requirements of the target audience and meet the values, so continually referring back to that project brief. Moving on to Task 2 then. So Task 2 involves experimentation with the graphic components, and again these are the graphic components as stated in the specification: colour, tone, line, composition, typography and imagery. Learners are required to annotate their experimentation and to include all experimentation, even rejected ideas. So the maximum number of marks available for this task is 27. And the task is marked against the experimentation only, with learners only being able to be awarded 13 marks and above if all 6 components have been experimented with, showing skill and logical connections with the brief. There doesn't need to be one slide for each component, and it is feasible that learners experiment with 2 components at once. So for example, imagery and colour, but the annotation should explain this fully. Ideas developed in the experimentation stage should also show some evidence of development and refinement as per the task given. Imagery sourced as part of research could be used here, and examiners saw this regularly where higher marks were awarded for this task. One example was where a learner had sourced, presented and referenced an image of a starburst pattern that they thought would really suit the context. They then applied that pattern to a typeface design. So that was a really good way to show the useful and relevant research that had taken place without producing pages and pages of image boards or mood boards with no annotation or explanation to them, and therefore couldn't be rewarded. Some good learner examples involved them taking an idea from Task 1 and experimenting further with an idea using a variety of traditional and digital techniques. In some instances, it was noted that evidence that had already been presented for Task 1 was then presented again and labelled as Task 2 without any experimentation. The experimentation should be clear and well annotated to be rewarded. So the maximum marks available for Task 3 is 36, and this is where learners present their final graphic design idea. Some learners provided evidence of the skills used in the creative process by digitising hand-drawn images using Photoshop. If the learner has annotated the production process clearly, this allows the examiner to see the skills that the learners used. To be awarded the higher mark bands, learners should combine the chosen elements of the experimentation from Task 2 to begin to build the final graphic design with the skills used and choices made clearly annotated. Learners should only include information as stated on the project brief. For this assessment, the Chief Examiner noted that some learners included a significant amount of detail and information in the poster which wasn't required, such as lists of bands performing at the festival, times, dates and venues. Learners have not been penalised for this, but it is unnecessary and time-consuming. In response to this brief, a range of methods were shown to create the final graphic design. Outcomes ranged from hand-drawn or painted ideas, use of print techniques, to hand-drawn ideas that had been developed and digitalised through the experimentation and final design stage. The maximum marks available for task 4 is 9 marks, and this is where learners need to evaluate their graphic design in relation to the brief. Examiners found that often learners focused on the improvements that could be made to the graphic design rather than the challenges faced and how the learner resolved this in the final design. Learners do need to ensure that they consider and evaluate the choices they've made, how they used the graphic design components, the skills that they've used, the challenges they faced, and finally how their design meets the brief and communicates the organisers' values of the Joined Up Festival. Those bullet points that are provided in the wording of the task could provide subheadings for the learners to structure their evaluation. Lastly, I'm going to share a statement from the Chief Examiner with some words of advice. Please remember that the external assessment is a synoptic assessment of internal units 1, 2 and 3. This does not mean that the tasks within the external assessment will be a direct copy of the learning outcomes within the first 3 internally assessed units. My advice is to ensure you've fully and completely explored Units 1, 2 and 3. I cannot stress how important Unit 1 is for learners to fully understand the graphic components and how to apply them. This is relevant for both the external assessment and the internal units, in particular when learners complete Units 2 and 3. If learners are being entered early for the external assessment in year 10 or below, depending on your delivery model, it may be that they've not had sufficient teaching and learning, followed by completing assessment tasks for Unit 1, 2 and 3 to be able to succeed to the best of their abilities. The next piece of advice is to encourage learners to read the tasks. As described within the Chief Examiner's reports, there has been some misinterpretation of the tasks, and as mentioned earlier, a lot of brief analysis, beautifully presented mood boards, in-depth poster analysis, all of which isn't included within the tasks and is not included within the mark scheme. Internet access has been allowed up to now to provide a platform for learners to be able to make a starting point, looking for inspiration only. Creative work must be original and the learner's own. If a learner uses images from the internet or other secondary source, it cannot be marked as the learner's work unless it's been suitably manipulated, even if it's referenced. Referencing is required as the learner must acknowledge use of other imagery, in particular for copyright reasons. The learner will be marked for all of the other components, but will be limited marks against imagery that has not been manipulated. I am more than aware that the use of stock imagery is standard practice in some areas of graphic design. However, the copyright is generally paid through stock image websites, or a subscription is paid for the stock image websites that allow limited download of images. We are teaching the learners to be excellent creative graphic designers, and we need to mark their creative responses against the qualification in the mark scheme. There is no content within the specification that encourages, suggests or states within the unit content and grading criteria that learners can use images that are not their own. In Unit 2, learners create work inspired by the work of others, such as Quentin Blake, for example. We wouldn't expect them to present the work of Quentin Blake as their own and be awarded for it. Practice the past papers. Allow the learner to be familiar with the content and to see the layout. Read the tasks, look at the mark scheme, and preparation is the key to success. Allow learners to respond individually to the tasks. This is not a design technology qualification, and in particular on this external assessment paper, examiners saw a very formulaic response, such as would be found in design technology papers, in particular with the brief analysis for task 1. Remember that this is a creative qualification, not a written external assessment. Examiners have seen some responses with significant amounts of written work that outweigh the creative and visual responses. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the content. On the screen you can see some contact details that you can use to get in touch with anybody here at NCFE if you'd like to forward any queries that you have following this session. Thank you for listening in. Bye.